to do these. You've all had the opportunity to watch our CRP informational video on the latest CRP sign up. If you have not, you can still access that at nebraskapf.com under the CRP sign up. There will also be a link for that at the end of this discussion. I'm Andy Hauser. I'm a coordinating biologist for Pheasants Forever in Nebraska Game and Parks out of Curtis, Nebraska. I'd like to welcome everybody to the one of the 3 Pheasants Forever sign up 56 Q&A sessions. Normally we hold these throughout the state with lots of different meetings and different places. And with the current state of things, we had to switch this up a bit, and we're excited to try this new platform. I would like to welcome our NRCS and FSA partners today. We have Rich Nelson, who is the Nebraska NRCS state wildlife biologist and state forester, to help us answer some questions. And then from FSA, I would also like to welcome Levain's off, Jana Ingerson-Laws, who is our Nebraska State FSA conservation specialist that works with CRP. In addition, we have multiple county executive directors and CRP technicians with FSA on with us as well. So if you do have a specific question to the county you are in, they'll be able to answer those at any time. I'd also like to welcome the folks from Nebraska Game and Parks. Adam Kester is our district manager here in the Southwest and is going to help us discuss some of our open fields and water and burger and pheasant plant opportunity areas that with our CRP enrollments can also have some additional incentives. So we'll hear from them a little bit later. This is really going to be very informal. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. The chat function is in the bottom middle portion of the screen. If you kind of hover your mouse, for those that haven't really been on Zoom a whole lot, if you hover your mouse kind of on the bottom middle portion of your screen, there'll be a chat box pops up. We'll utilize that chat box for questions throughout this hour. If you feel comfortable asking a question in person, I also encourage you to speak up at any time. If you do have a verbal question for the group, please identify yourself and where you're kind of located so that we can kind of get the right person to best serve your question specifically to the region. We do ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless asking a question to prevent background noise to the group. Your microphone can be muted and unmuted by clicking the microphone icon in your bottom left-hand corner. So that kind of looks like an old-fashioned microphone right there if you hover on the bottom left corner. That will unmute you and mute you as you want to chat or not chat. So and again, we'd really like this to be very relaxed and informal to get those questions answered that you all might have. We'll have multiple fact sheets that you'll be able to see while we're going through this. Can you see my screen, Rich Nelson?
Yes, you have the agenda up and I can see your cursor.
Very good, very good. I almost always have technical difficulties. That's good. We'll be showing lots of these on here. If we do get a question at any point in time, make sure to stop, folks, and we can get those answered. All right. So again, thanks everybody for hopping on. Let's see, we're at 30 folks. We're still waiting for a few, but I think we'll kind of continue to roll here and go over some of our environmental benefits discussion. On the registration, we did have quite a few questions on kind of the how the CRP sign up works, how the ranking works in the general sign up, and then just kind of some overall questions on the program itself. We'll kind of touch base on a lot of those things. If you have not got to watch the whole CRP video, It goes into a lot more detail than what we will today, but we can we'll still try to answer all those questions that we have pop up. So with that, CRP is a federally funded voluntary program that contracts with ag producers so that environmentally sensitive ag land is not farmed or ranch, but can be devoted to conservation benefits. In return, FSA provides participants with annual rental rates and cost share systems. We have lots of questions on our deal about kind of contract length. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but contract duration, as far as the conservation practice, is going to be between 10 and 15 years. As far as the ranking of CRP, so in simplicity, somebody comes in, they have a piece of land they want to enroll, and they can offer up an offer to go into CRP, and each offer is basically assigned a score, and on the offer's relative environmental factors. So all these offers go in, and they all compete against each other for CRP. Well, the wildlife factor was one of the large N1 factors, one of the larger point options that we have available, and what you can really drastically pick from yourself as far as being able to boost your points through the sign up. The wildlife N1 factor is a very simplistic way of kind of saying what we're going to plant, what it's going to be. The native mixes of diverse species generally receive the highest points. That'll be consistent through the whole through all of our discussion today. Before I dig really far into the EBI, Jana, we did have a couple questions on general ownership and as far as the timeframes of owning the ground and when you can enroll that. Would you mind touching base on the 12 months?
Yes, this is Jana with the FSA state office. So ownership for a general CRP sign up, you have to have owned the land for at least a year by the end of sign up period. So sign up period is over on February 12th of 2021. So you have to have 1 year ownership as of that date, the end of sign up, 2/12.
Very good. Thanks. Thanks, Jana, for touching.
Does that answer all the questions, Andy, or are there more questions on that at all?
Yeah, there was I think that kind of touches on it. You know, somebody that recently purchased land, they would, you have to correct me, but they'd have to own that 12 months prior to that sign up, correct?
Correct. You have to own at least 12 months before the end of sign up by the close of general sign up.
Very good.
And of course, there are some exceptions, so you could contact your office. There are a couple of exceptions. If you were acquiring the land by will or succession, there's an exception for that. So again, if anything else, contact your local office. But pretty much general rules are you have to have owned that land for 12 months before the end of sign up.
Very good. Todd or Dawn, did that kind of answer your guys' questions on that? All right. We'll continue to go along through the wildlife ranking as far as the environmental benefits index, how you guys can offer your best chances or likelihood to increase your score of getting in the program. As I started to dig into here, the wildlife cover benefits, that really is the kind of the what you plant and what it is a simplistic way to go from there. We'll dig into more of this, but it kind of receives anywhere from 10 to 50 points depending on what it is. The second N1B factor is our wildlife enhancement factor. On this sub-factor provides up to 20 points for actions producers take to enhance the wildlife benefits offered acres. Enhancement to the acres is necessary in order to receive the point. For example, to receive the 20 points, producer may offer to establish a minimum of 10% of the acres offered to pollinator habitat. So as we go through these options, these are all electoral things you can pick that will affect your chances of increasing that score to, rank higher in the sign up. This safe area devoted does not exist anymore here in Nebraska. So we'll just cut that one. It'd mostly be here for the pollinator habitat. And then kind of that last one that you can, make sure I didn't skip over here. That last one that we can really impact by our elections of what we do is the N6, which is cost. By offering a lesser amount than the maximum payment rate, you can also receive 0 to 25 points. So kind of making your CRP offer more competitive. As we said, you'll compete against everybody in the nation that also wants to enroll into CRP. As such, demand to enroll the land in CRP is expected to be high. To make your offers more competitive, producers could really consider the kind of options that we're going to go into. The single most important producer decision involves determining which cover practice to apply to the acres offered. Planning or establishing the highest scoring cover mixture is the best way to improve the chance of your offer being accepted. So in generality, the more diverse kind of species or the different practices, which we'll go into here, the more diverse that is, the more likelihood there's more points associated with it. And then the other one, producers could also accept a lower payment rate than the maximum amount FSA is willing to offer as another option. So the cover practices, we get really complicated, and as far we use, I catch myself doing it all the time of using CP1, CP2s, lots of different alphabet soup type of numbers, but it's really the cover itself. So cover practices. A CP1, which would be, maybe just an introduced grass or legume, it ranges 0 to 40 points. You can see the CP2, which is probably a lot more common than what we see, would venture anywhere from 0 to 50 points. That existing stand of what we look at for a CP2 would be a minimum of 2 to 3 species, or planted new mixed stand, a minimum of 3 species of at least 2 native grasses in one form. So as you can see, from going from 1 species to 2 to 3, and introduced to native, that varies on the points that you receive. And that's directly related to the wildlife benefits that we kind of expect from the plantings. As we move into other cover practices, we have a CP4D, which is very common, and then the remainder of the highlighted ones that you can see. The CP25 would be up to 50, and the CP4D would be 50, and then a pollinator stand could also be added as well for that offer. Existing stand or planting would be a ½ an acre for pollinator habitat of a diverse mix of multiple species suited for pollinators. For those that do want to establish a pollinator mix to, as we mentioned, we don't have safe, but for those that wanted to try to bump that score up, see the additional 20 points, and establish a pollinator habitat or a CP42. These CRP CP42s they have a couple different options for that. If it's less than 10 acres of size, a producer would be required to at least 1 acre of pollinator habitat, and the habitat acres must be at least be a ½ an acre. So if they're 10 acres or greater, at least 10% of the acreage offered in pollinator habitat area must be at least 0.5 acres. Rich, do you mind giving us a little bit of kind of what we expect to see in a pollinator habitat planning compared to some of our other CP practices?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The pollinator planting is really intended to benefit native bees, different species of butterflies. And I don't want to say it's exclusively insects, but it's heavily predominated by insects. And in our method of doing that, we look at planting a wide variety of wildflowers. And there's also some provisions for a small amount of introduced blooms to be included in that. And we also try to plant a diversity of wildflowers that go across the bloom periods. So we want stuff that blooms first thing in the spring and keeps blooming, different kinds of plants all the way through, so that there's stuff blooming at the end of the growing season as well. And so you can kind of count on there being a fair amount of diversity. Our minimum standard is at least 9 wildflowers with 3 in each bloom period, early, middle, and late. But generally speaking, we often plant 20 to 30. And part of the reason for that is we can plant a more diverse mix often for the same price as a less diverse mix. And it also spreads your risk out. You know, you may get some species that don't establish well, others that do. And so we work our way through that. Did that help, Andy?
Yeah, I greatly appreciate it, Rich. That helps a lot. As we move into those, those options here. Oops, sorry guys. I'm getting a little lag on my screen here. Well, you can work through FSA to kind of go through what really best works for you. And I mean FSA as in NRCS, FSA, your local biologist. All those are really good places to kind of help work through the factors of what you'll end up with, kind of what your goals are, and how that'll play out into the CRP program ranking. When we'll continue to dig into a little bit of these points here moving forward. But then the last thing was, as we noted, really impacted with our cover, what we planted, and then the only other option of impacting that we can really assess with would be this offer less, the lesser for a payment rate. And you can chat with FSA about how that works when you're looking at your offer. But some of the ones that we really can't pick and that we're automatically going to get when we're looking at our the likelihood of something getting in or not getting in is also comes into play is our priority areas for the state. Each priority area does provide some additional incentives, or I'm sorry, additional ranking points for enrollment. So if you happen to be in one of these pink areas, there's also a ranking factor that goes into that. The wildlife zone for the sign up also adds additional points through that sign up, as well as the another air quality, which we don't have that map on here. So these would also provide additional points for you as you're signing up if you were happen to be located in one of those areas. So to kind of get into this a little bit more, the Environmental Benefits Index is a quick hitter that we come up with to really help simplify how we kind of look at this. So we have this wildlife factor, which is our N1A. It's really the same thing we're looking at from before, but it's just a different way. This would be your cover type. We have our N1B, which is our enhancements, which we could pick. And then we would have our priority zones. So these are the three that, these two we can really factor in. And the remainder of these kind of fall into what the program itself looks at for awarding points, so to say. We had a few questions on the, how long are the contracts? What are my options there? And then how does that point system really work? I really like this slide for kind of giving a pretty darn good example of how this ranking plays out. So as we're talking about, we go into an office and we're talking about a CP2, we want native grass. We could have a 10-year contract. A CP25 could be a 10 to 15-year contract, but all these also play into the points that are associated with them. A CP2, through that N1A and N1B could receive anywhere from 23 to 73 points. Compared to a CP42, that would be all the way up to 100. The important part of these, is making sure you're enrolling what you're comfortable with as far as a diversity factor, as these things do require you to maintain that over time. But as you can see, if you were a person that maybe wasn't in a priority area, you only wanted to put a simplistic CP1, which might be a non-native cool season grass, and you really weren't wanting to do any other enhancements, you'd be looking at 10 points there and then another 3 points. So you'd be looking at 13 points total. Comparing to somebody that, is a little more willing to put native grasses like a CP25, a native grass with wildflowers in it, they would get 50 points up front there. If they were okay with possibly adding 10% of it to be pollinator habitat, they'd pick up some additional points here. They do receive additional 25 points if under another category of enduring benefits, and then the additional points on the N5D. So you can see that the difference between 80 to 100 points comparing to somebody that might get 13. That's where that sign up and that competitive process really kind of comes into play. Are there any questions on the EBI? Sorry here. That was a very, very fast rundown. So we do have really good people on here, by far much sharper than I am, to answer some of these questions if we do. Bruce, have we had any questions in the chat?
We've had a few, and Jana sent out a link, but as of now, we don't have any in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any questions on the EBI before we turn it over to the commission to talk about some additional incentives? And we will have some more time here at the end to take any other questions that we might have. We just wanted to touch base on this, as we did have several of these questions brought up in the attendance registration.
Andy, I might just offer one comment related to CP25, because it's a popular option. It obviously gives quite a few points. There are places in the state that don't qualify because they don't have, you might call a prairie type that's in decline or that is rare. And probably the most notable portion of the state where that's true is in the Sandhills, because we still have a pretty large abundance of Sandhills prairie still remaining on the landscape. But there's still a significant amount of the cropped area of the state that's tall grass, mixed grass, short grass out west that does qualify. So I just want to put that out there in case somebody walks in and says, I want CP25, and for whatever reason, that parcel of land is not in a geographic area that's eligible.
Thank you, Rich. I forgot that.
No problem.
I also did not touch base on food plots. We did have another question on food plots as well in the registration. For those that want to add a food plot to your offer, that is an option through most of the practices. 5 points, basically, if you did add a food plot, you could have 5 points for that, and up to 20 points for the 10% of acres in pollinator habitat. That's really your two options for that N1B to increase those points there. You will want to keep in mind that there's rules to follow for both of those additional items, and talk to your local biologist to work through those rules. We won't get into all the in-depth kind of ins and outs of the pollinator and food plot options, but I did want to touch base that they are there.
I would notate, Andy, this is Jana with FSA. When you do add food plots, that is a non-cost shared item. So you're planting out of pocket for food plots.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jana. You can get a lot more of that information through your local FSA offices, the technicians that are there, local farm bill biologists that'll cover your area. We'll get to that at the end here. And then, enter the NRCS offices can also kind of help you walk through those questions. Given the time frame here and that we're really trying to keep this, well, we have to keep this within an hour. At this point in time, I'd like to turn things over to Adam with the Nebraska Game and Parks to go over the POAs, incentives, and OFW. Adam, can you hear me?
Yeah, you bet.
Hey.
Adam, can we jump in real quick? We did have a question come up before you start. I thought maybe we'd get it off the chat if somebody could answer it for us before you went in with your stuff with the Game and Parks. And the question was, do CRP acres affect base acres? And I don't know if Jana can answer that or not, but if somebody else.
Yeah, Bruce,
like to
this
take
is
that.
Jana.
Thanks, Jana.
I can answer that. Your base acres and your CRP acres, they cannot exceed your DCP cropland on the farm. So you would have to check with your local office and how your farm and tractor sign up. But basically, you can't get paid a farm program payment and on CRP both. So we do have to reduce those base acres if they're exceeding your DCP cropland. You do get them back when your contract expires. We do put those base acres back on, but that is something to notate. You'll want to work with your local office to determine how many base acres you have on your farm and if they might have to deduct any to enroll in CRP.
One more quick one that just showed up is it says, do you have to plant food plot? It's every year. And from what I understand, Rich, you can help me out on this as well, but it kind of depends on what type of food plot you want to put out there, whether it's an annual food plot or a perennial food plot. And you can, work with your local office there to figure out which one you would like to do. But there would be an opportunity to plant a perennial food plot where you didn't have to plant it every year if that's something that best fits your operation.
That's correct, Bruce. And I would really say there's three options. One is planting an annual grain type of a planting every year. We do allow for kind of a rotation so that in odd years, like a 2-year rotation on that, so that in odd years.
Hey there, Ron Richter, how you doing?
Food plot and you have.
Yes, it is, but the bar is closed right now.
We might need to mute somebody there, but and then as Bruce
Happy
mentioned,
hour in about
the perennial food plot is also an option. And really what you're doing there is you're planting something that's different than your CRP stand. That's probably heavily dominated by introduced legumes, maybe some forbs that produce forage, seed, grain, that type of thing. So those are kind of your three options there.
This is Gary. Got a question. Does the NRCS biologist usually determine what goes into your area, your CRP acres?
And you're referring to the cover type planting, correct?
Yes.
So yes, whether it's the farm bill biologist or the NRCS staff person, that's kind of where the technical part of the planting and the design resides. And you have those base parameters like Andy just covered here, where you have to have a certain number of species of either introduced grass, native grass, et cetera. And then beyond that, there's a lot of flexibility in how to design that mix. And so we do have kind of some typical mixes that apply to certain parts of the state, certain soil types, and certain CP practices. But then beyond that, there's some flexibility to adjust those. And we consider cost and a whole variety of things in that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would note, Rich, also with that, like you're saying, as a producer, you'll want to work closely with your biologist or NRCS person to determine kind of what your goals are and your different levels. There's minimum standards, like Rich said, but there's also some options, like if you want to go above and beyond that, but you do have to keep in mind cost share, and some of that might be out of your own pocket because we have pretty much a set rate on cost share of what we're going to pay. But the producer also has kind of wants to interact with your NRCS or biologist to make sure you're getting the goals yet meeting standards also for that practice.
Question for you on the CRP mixes. When you get like 7 or 8 grasses and then all the forbs, like 26 forbs, are you required to put all those in the mix that's given to you, or can you deviate from that?
Well, that's why it's important, as Jana noted, to kind of work up front. If you have some specific things you want or don't want, and sometimes that happens either way, a wildflower that somebody loves, a grass species that they hate, et cetera, there's some ways to adjust those mixes. But if you're handed a mix that's been designed and it has 25 species in it, it's also designed for the total amount of seed. So as you start pulling out species A, species B, you start reducing the total amount of seed being applied. And so that can be done, but then we have to adjust the others up to kind of make up that difference. If that makes sense, kind of how that balancing act works.
All great questions. Is that, Bruce, the last one we have on the chat for now?
Yep, we're good. Go ahead,
Awesome.
Adam.
Hey, sounds good. Thanks for the time. Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Kester. I'm a biologist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and a couple of things I wanted to chat about at the meeting tonight was our Focus on Pheasants program, or our Burger and Plan for Pheasants, if you've heard of that, and also our Open Fields and Waters program. So a little history on our approach to pheasant habitat management and pheasant opportunities. Or pheasant hunting opportunities. We created the Burger and Plan for Pheasants. It was a 5-year plan to essentially create the best pheasant hunting experience for the most hunters, was the overall objective. But primarily we were looking to target areas that made sense to influence for pheasant habitat, and try to increase pheasant habitat through enrolling CRP, working with landowners on other areas of the farm, and doing so through technical assistance and through financial incentives, as well as pushing for more opportunity through our public access program, which is the Open Fields and Waters program. And so what Andy's got on the screen here actually shows the South Central Focus on Pheasants area. Andy, if you wouldn't mind jumping to the Southwest FOP area, there you go. I'll start there. So within this focus area and the next 3 that we'll talk about, we actually have a sign-up incentive payment, and they're differing amounts amongst the areas. But in the Southwest Focus on Pheasants area, if your property lies within that boundary or in the highlighted area, you qualify for a $50 an acre one-time upfront bonus payment for re-enrolling or enrolling new CRP. And so really what we're trying to do is to make the initial jump into CRP just a little bit shorter, and try to take care of any out-of-pocket expense, or just put a little extra cash in your pocket for future management. We understand that especially with pheasant habitat, CRP has really been the stronghold for our pheasant populations in Nebraska, and so we want to see as much and as high a quality as CRP, as we're able to put on the landscape. And so The $50 an acre incentive is again available to anybody enrolling CRP or re-enrolling expired CRP. These incentives do not require public access. The public access program, which is Open Fields and Waters, is a complete add-on. It's a separate program. And in this area, we offer $8 an acre for high quality CRP. And so if you wanted to scroll to maybe the central pheasant opportunity, Andy, or Central Platte pheasant opportunity area, Nathan was gonna discuss the South Central. All right, perfect. So the Central Platte pheasant opportunity area is another one of the areas that was targeted through the Bergeron Plan for pheasants. This area, we're offering a $100 an acre upfront bonus payment for folks getting into CRP. If you have any or if you need contact information for any biologist that would cover that particular area, be sure and reach out to one of us, and we can put you in touch with Brian or Zach or any of the other Farm Bill biologists or biologists that cover that area. The Central Pheasant Opportunity area, so just north of there in the Custer County area. Sorry, Andy, we're kind of bouncing around. There we go. The Central Pheasant Opportunity area there, it also offers $100 an acre for a sign-up incentive payment for new and re-enrolled CRP. For public access, the Open Fields and Waters program, we do have a little better offering here. The lower loop NRD is actually offered to match our Open Fields and Waters payment. And so the Open Fields and Waters payment for CRP is $8 an acre, but with a new agreement through OFW, the NRD will give you an additional $8 an acre through a separate agreement with them. And so producers within that area can get $16 an acre for allowing public walk-in hunting. And so in those areas, we also offer incentives to do tree removal, or what we call early successional habitat management. If you got areas of the farm that aren't necessarily a priority within your regular farming practices, you want to do a little habitat work. We've got a great team of biologists that can help tweak that to make it really wildlife friendly, and we've got a slew of different ways to do that at low cost. And so so the Focus on Pheasants program is kind of an umbrella program to make the farm a little more pheasant friendly, that is. But the Open Fields and Waters program, again, it is a very great program for folks that allow hunters onto their property. It's a great way to boost your income a little bit. It's certainly not a huge payment, but with enough acres and over time, it certainly does, make an impact for income. Another great thing that we hear from landowners is it's also has a liability coverage through the Nebraska Recreation Liability Act, meaning that if somebody were to get hurt on your property, the Recreation Act basically states that the landowner assumes no liability if they're not charging. And so this is really the only way that you can attain income on your property and through your hunting rights and still be covered through the Recreation Liability Act. The contracts for the Open Fields and Waters, really flexible and really simple. It's a one-page agreement. We go 1 to 5 years. We're not looking to enroll absolutely every inch of everybody's property. We're only willing to enroll whatever the landowner's comfortable in doing. If you're interested in any of that, obviously contact any of the Farm Bill wildlife biologists, coordinating biologists, or any of the Game and Parks biologists as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I missed, Andy.
No, I think that's great, Adam. We'll skim through the rest of these opportunity areas. You
Actually,
guys
one
can-
sec.
Oh,
I
yeah, go
think
ahead.
if Nathan's ready, the South Central FOP area, I mentioned, I meant to get back to that and let Nathan provide some input there. One last thing on the Open Fields and Waters program too. Last year was a record-setting year for the commission and partners. We get a lot of help too. This isn't just a strictly commission program, but you know, we enrolled over 370,000 acres last year, worked with just over 1,000 landowners and paid out right around 1.4 million to Nebraska landowners. And so it's been widely accepted and a good program. You know, it's a good option for folks. You know, it's not for everyone, but for the folks that want to allow folks to hunt, it's a good option. So if Nathan's ready, I'll let him introduce himself and talk about the South Central focus on pheasant area.
Yep. Thanks, Adam. Andy, won't take up too much time. I just wanted to kind of put a face with a name. My name is Nathan Wilhite. I'm based out of Alma, cover the South Central focus area that you see here, help out in Phelps and Kearney County and bump over into Webster and Nuckolls County as well. So, you know, kind of all the things that Adam just mentioned, that's my job in this area. So anything related to CRP or habitat related, be glad to help out. The best way to reach me is probably through your NRCS or FSA offices. I work very closely with all of them. So anyway, that's all I got.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Adam. Greatly appreciate your guys' help there. We did have a few questions on general CRP, kind of what the average soil rental rates look like. This here is a map of basically, it's essentially the actual average of the rates per county. The actual rental rate itself will vary by what the soil itself on the offer that you're looking at doing. But overall, it gives you an average for what those rates kind of look like in your part of the world. The general CRP does have a little bit different soil rental rate than the continuous CRP. Some of our continuous options receive a little bit more of a boost at 90% compared to our general offers. So you can also tell the average there per county on those. That's not exact. That's not what you're necessarily going to get. You know, that is, each soil type and each offer is different, and you'll want to run that through FSA to figure out what your rental rate will be. So on the folks that had rental rates, if you're looking for more particular information about that, like I said, their local FSA office, NRCS, your local biologist can help you work through that, but FSA is going to have that number of what exactly that rental rate would be for the piece of ground that you offer. Jana, anything to add to that?
No, Andy, I think that's it. It's basically your top 3 soils. They're going to we have a software program that'll run your offer through and give you the average of your top 3 soils. So again, like Andy said, there's an average rental rate for the county, but your specific land is going to vary based on the soils you have out there.
Perfect. Rich, you did such a fine job yesterday talking about some of the changes through this farm bill and enrollment of the haying and grazing. We did have a couple questions on that. Do you mind touching base on some of the kind of the new things through this sign up?
I'd be glad to, Andy. And I won't get too far into the weeds. And if you have specific questions, please speak up and ask them or put them in the chat box. But haying and grazing has always been a component of CRP. What happened in the last farm bill and the last couple of years is that became a little more liberalized in terms of how haying and grazing can be applied and on what CP options that we've covered where it could apply. And so typically in the past, and I bring this up because some of you may be in CRP now and have been for years and think, well, I can't hay that or graze that CP25 prairie thing. And that's kind of a pain. I get a lot of points, but I can't make use of it when I want to. And so that is one of the key provisions that has changed, is that nearly all of the CRP options for your cover type are eligible now for haying or grazing. There's a few exceptions, things like windbreaks and, riparian forest buffers where you have trees and it's just not practical to make use of that. And so that has been a component of CRP for a long time. But if you have wetland practices or some of these buffer practices that are in, like filter strips along streams that are a strip of grass there that are in continuous CRP, or as I mentioned, the CP25 prairie option, or even the pollinator option, there may be some specific timelines and ways that you can use it. And Andy's slides here show, grazing generally is every other year at the most. Haying can be as often as every third year. You do have a rental reduction payment for haying as well as grazing, but there are some instances where grazing does not have a rental reduction payment. Most notably would be if you're using haying in a very specific strategy as a way to accomplish your management. And Andy, you'll be talking about management here in the next couple slides.
We could dig into that, Rich, if you wanted.
Okay.
If you wanted to.
Yep, I'll just mention that for a long time now, management, or what was formerly referred to as mid-contract management, has been required on most CRP enrollments, and that is continuing. The difference is that when all these same changes were made, there is no longer cost share assistance available to implement that management. And when I talk about management, I talk about a prescribed burn or a very strategic grazing action, or sometimes we'll use disking and interseeding or a herbicide application to basically set back plant succession, maintain that diversity over time in your stand. But because haying and grazing have been liberalized more, we've been able to incorporate the use of haying and grazing to some extent. And again, there's some specific parameters there of how it's applied as a means to accomplish, at least in some cases, your management obligations using haying and grazing, or some of the other tools that I mentioned. So it's just something to keep in mind. You're going to have an obligation there to implement management. But for those people that are interested in forage, or they feel that they can work with their neighbor on some haying and grazing, there may be some opportunities there.
Rich, I don't know if you can see the chat. There was a question about the gleaning of the stalks on some of the CRP. Do you want to kind of touch on that real quick?
You bet. And so that is yet another, and that's why there's so many details that I didn't want to get too far into the weeds. But yes, I would say that a majority, especially of the partial field practices, things like filter strips and field borders and so forth, can be grazed at the same time that you're gleaning your crop stubble that's adjacent to that. And so that's still a provision. Again, there's some parameters that we need to live by to make sure that we protect the cover type. But in my opinion, I think it's fairly accommodating for producers. And Jana, just a quick question to make sure I'm getting this right. When they glean, or they're grazing incidentally, there's not a payment reduction now for that action, correct?
I think you're correct, Rich. I agree.
Historically, there was, if you were grazing your filter strip at the same time as the adjacent corn stalks, you took a 25% reduction, and I think that's been eliminated.
I think that eliminated in this farm bill. And again, yeah, you'll always want to double check with your FSA office. You always have to have a permission, basically a letter authorizing that any kind of haying or grazing activity, because NRCS has to make sure your stand can support that activity. So you always do have to go in and request any type of haying or grazing.
Yep,
and they'll give you, like Rich said, they'll get you the more specifics according to what practice you have and what's allowed, etc.
Thank you, guys. Are there, if are there any, I guess you can see the map on the page here. This is the contact information for the Pheasants Forever partner biologists that are kind of situated around the state. There was some questions, as far as looking at your property, wondering kind of what the best thing would be to do with birds or what we needed to do. You can look at these folks, see who's close. Nebraska Game and Parks also has very good private lands biologists that we work one-on-one with also. I'll leave this contact information up. But I did want to make sure we still had a little bit of time here to answer any more questions that were out there. Anything specifically that we missed or you guys still had. So you can unmute or feel free to type it in the chat box.
Question for you. On a initial contract and procedure, I guess, whatever we say, why is July they listed or was stated in there that they wanted to probably come in and spray the warm season grasses on the first year of establishing your CRP, especially since it's been a renewed contract, I guess is what I get at stage 2. But why did we spray the warm season grasses in July to knock them back?
Rich,
Andy,
you want to touch on?
yeah, I can take that if you'd like. What I suspect you're talking about is there are instances where when that contract gets re-enrolled, it's been in grass for 10, 15 years in some cases, and the diversity diminishes over that time. And then we lose the wildflower, the forb, broadleaf plant component of that stand. And in order to meet some of the criteria in CRP, then we need to basically disturb the grass in some way, whether that's spraying, disking, something of that nature, to try to weaken it just enough that we can try to get some of those other species injected back in there, have them establish and maintain that diversity going forward. I recognize that that's often viewed as, very counterproductive by some, like, well, I got a beautiful stand of grass. It ties back into the fact that the plant diversity then fosters the wildlife diversity that we have out there, the interest that we have nowadays in pollinator insects and that type of thing. Did that get at what you were asking?
Yeah, I think so. The biggest thing is we're going to do a burn. Within probably a couple weeks after that, we'll do a spray to eradicate a bunch of the brome, because there's a lot of brome has been, takes over no matter what, no matter where. And then was stated that we do that mid-year or that mid-summer, I guess, July spray. And then we're going to do another fall spray for the brome. And then probably after as stated, after the first frost, or freezing, killing frost, I should say, then we're going to interseed it with a mix and forbs.
Sure. And your herbicides in that case are doing two things. One, where you must have a stand where we're targeting that smooth brome that's invading that warm season stand. And then the warm season stand must still be healthy enough that when it's peaking its growth in midsummer, we need to sort of weaken it at the same time. That's kind of the philosophy behind, I think, what you're describing. Jana, do you want to take oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is it done all the time, or can you bypass that step sometimes?
Well, we attempt to evaluate those stands at the time of enrollment, and the new program, some of the changes that have been made in this last farm bill does require NRCS to inspect each contract as it's nearing the end of its contract and look at that diversity. And if you had adequate diversity for whatever reason, just stars were right, or you did a good job of trying to manage that brome along the way and do some spot spraying, then there would not be a requirement. You'd still have that management or that mid-contract management requirement somewhere out there in year 5 or 6. But if you met the diversity up front, you would not have that upfront treatment like sequence that you're talking about.
The reason why I say that is because when we looked at it this spring, or I mean, I guess I should say last summer and spring sometime, we had, I had anywhere from 5 to 6 different types of grasses.
Mhm.
Plus I have, and this is an honest to goodness truth, millions, and I mean millions of milkweed, which is a high butterfly, and I have showed a high percentage of monarchs up in that area that I have. So my concern that I have is when they come in there in July and spray that grass and stuff, there goes all the monarchs, there goes all the milkweed and so forth. So I'm a little concerned about that because I mean, that's taken quite a few years to get that established. And it's kind of one of those things like, yeah, I don't want to kill the milkweed right off the bat and try to get them reestablished again.
Sure. I tell you what I'll do. I'll put my contact information in the chat box, and you and I can visit some more about what's been prescribed, why it's been prescribed, and how we might evaluate that.
All right, Rich, this is Jana. I think I'm going to answer, there's a question in the chat box about a producer that Dan and Kathy's acquired 15 acres outside of Omaha, adjacent to some native grasses, but it's never been tilled. So it's not going to meet cropland requirements because we haven't had, you have to basically have cropland 4 out of 6 years, 2012 through 2017. The program that FSA would have that fits that, there's a CRP program called CRP Grasslands. The Grasslands program is meant to allow people to enroll historical grass, and it could be non-tilled or tilled grass that's been out there, and maybe usually it's people are haying or grazing it. The CRP Grasslands program allows you to possibly do some haying and grazing, or if you don't want to hay and graze, you don't have to either. The rental rates are completely different than a continuous or a general CRP sign up. They're quite a bit lower because it's a working lands program, so they're authorizing more than a regular CRP contract would. I know that link I put has some fact sheets on grasslands, but the CRP Grasslands program is also similar to general, where you have to put an offer in during a ranking period. March 15th through April 23rd is when the Grasslands offer period will be conducted. So again, I would work with your local office. If you're interested in that program, they could give you a little more detail as to like what your rental rate would be. You always have the option. NRCS would have to develop, like if you're gonna hay and graze it, they'd work with you to develop that hay or grazing plan. But it is quite a bit different than a general or continuous CRP in the fact that we're not really planting a grass practice out there. It's something that's established, and then we'd work with you on what your needs are out there.
Who would that be in Douglas County?
In Douglas County, actually, Douglas, Sarpy, and Dodge all are in the same office now. I think they might go down to the Douglas County once in a while, but I would contact Dodge County, and that FSA office, that phone number would be 402-721-8455. That would get you to the service center in Dodge County to work with.
Thank you very kindly.
You're welcome.
One of the fun side notes is we spotted pheasants on our property, and so we want to continue that trend of accepting wildlife and natural grasses to foster on our property.
That sounds like a good fit. And I think, Bruce, were you going to mention anything that NRCS might have if they had any programs that might assist too?
Yeah, without getting in the weeds too much for tonight, I was just going to mention, make sure you check with your local office, like Janice said. But on the NRCS side of the aisle, that we have EQIP and CSP, some of the programs they work with, along with some Pheasants Forever programs we have statewide as well. So those landowners out there that don't meet cropping history, and that is an issue for them or an obstacle to overcome, there might be other alternatives out there for you. So make sure you contact your local NRCS office to check them out.
Thank you kindly.
All right, it's nearing 7 o'clock here. Were there any other messages that we missed in the chat, Bruce, or Rich put his information down in there? Thank you, Rich.
Andy, I'm going to cut in just a second, just because I'm thinking about our conservation priority areas. I know we mentioned those areas earlier. They have changed since we had a general sign up last year. So it's always good. Don't assume just because you might not have been in a conservation priority area last sign up that you aren't in it this time, because we did evaluate those and change those. So make sure to check if you're not sure if you're in a CPA area or not. Your local office is going to be able to tell you that, and they have maps that'll show those CPA areas. But those have changed since the last year when we did a general sign up.
Thank you, Jana. All right. Were there any other last second questions for tonight? If you do have more questions that you get off this and they stumble upon, feel free to contact your local NRCS, FSA, biologist on the screen there. We'll be glad to talk you through kind of the process and guide you along the way there. With that, I greatly appreciate everybody tuning in and helping. So have a great evening.